blessed tonight
hear
to
you.
be able to join you again. You cannot hear me. That is not good.
I hear you now.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I heard that. Yeah.
Okay. I'm having technological issues over here.
It's okay.
But I'm excited tonight to have a guest with me, a very special guest, because it's her first time on the platform, and someone I consider a friend, and we have been having conversations about our children, about the children in our community, not our children, but the children in our community, and how what we say and do impacts them. And so tonight I am excited to have with me Professor Michele Schlehofer, who is a community psychologist and professor of psychology at the Salisbury University. Michele, welcome to the platform.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, it's indeed a pleasure to have you here. If we do have some technological issues, I want you all to bear with us because this is a very important conversation, one that we really, really need to have. And so tonight, I want to talk to Michele. As I said, she is a professor of psychology. And one of the things that we want to discuss is the impact of words on our children, and how some of the things that we say to them and that other people say to them impacts their personality, it impacts their behavior, it impacts their outlook on life and how they feel about themselves. And so tonight, this is one of the things that we want to discuss. I guess it's really the foundation of our conversation tonight, Michele. But a few weeks ago, I was made aware of a report that stated that the county that we live in has like the highest number of what they call emergency psychiatric petitions, where they take children from the school to the hospital to be evaluated in emergency rooms for psychiatric issues. And this report was given to me from someone, printed it off the Associated Press, from the Hechinger report, which means that it really, it was nationwide. And it disturbed me greatly because as a mother and a grandmother, reading something like that just really kind of did something to me. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about, and as a person who's involved in our communities, as you are, and dealing with our children, you would probably be able to explain exactly what this emergency petition is way better than I can. But before we get into that, I want you to explain to us exactly what is a community psychiatrist. What exactly do you do in the communities?
Sure. So I'm a community psychologist, which is a subdiscipline of the larger field of psychology that looks at social structures and systems. So and we also look at individual level factors like personality or trauma experiences or family history. But community psychologists are also much more likely to look at what we call the ecological setting. So the community, the culture that somebody's raised in, the school environment, and how those impact individual people. And likewise, how people impact their environments, right? Because it's a cyclical process. So I'm not a clinician or a counseling psychologist. I don't know a lot about like traditional mental health stuff, and I don't do counseling. But, we have a lot of insight into the ways that settings impact people, and again, how people can impact their settings. So, you asked what an emergency petition is. So, an emergency petition is essentially where somebody makes a designation that a person's behavior is exhibiting a mental health crisis of some sort, and that they need an emergency psychological evaluation. So in the school system here, that would entail taking the youth, right, who we're working with in schools to Title Health and admitting them for a psychiatric assessment.
Okay, and what would be a reason, what would be a behavior, I should say, that would make someone in administration or whatever decide that that was a decision or a choice that they needed to make? What could a child be doing that would end them up in that situation?
Yeah, so I think that that's the question we actually should be asking, right? When we're seeing that Wicomico County has higher rates of emergency petition use in comparison to other counties in Maryland. And it sounds like also from that report from other counties and other school districts in the country, right? And as to what types of behaviors kids are exhibiting in schools, that's raising alarms among administrators. I don't know if I could actually directly answer that question, but I think that the elevated use of emergency petitions in this county is quite concerning, because there's no obvious explanation, right? That why would there be a greater reliance on emergency petitions here as opposed to other counties in the state, or even other counties next door, right? All kids in this area have been more or less equally impacted by COVID. Rates of poverty are not necessarily higher in Wicomico County versus Somerset. The explanations don't really line up. So I think that those are questions that we need to really be asking of the administration. What types of behaviors are they seeing that's making them make a determination that an emergency petition is appropriate, as opposed to some other type of response? Because if you can't imply from my answer, I don't think it's because there's more mental health problems in this county. That just doesn't sit well as an explanation for a disproportionate reliance on emergency petitions here.
Thank you. And as a mother and a grandmother, I have to agree. I just cannot accept. Nobody will be able to convince me that we have more mental health issues in this county than any other county surrounding us. And so I'm glad to hear you say that as a professional who deals with mental health behaviors. And I was talking to a couple of mothers who, have experienced that emergency petition. I even know a lady personally who's called 3 or 4 times in one school year to meet at the hospital because her son had been taken. And even children as young as 5 years old have been put in handcuffs and put in the back of the police car and taken to Title Health to be evaluated because they were behaving in ways that were disruptive or so forth and so on. So I'm concerned, and as you said, I think this is something that needs to be addressed to the school administration and as parents, because one of the things that I like to use this platform for is to get people to just be realistic about what's going on and do something. We get a lot of complaints. We get a lot of people saying, oh, they shouldn't do that. And then that's that. We don't have anything else. But we need to join together and go to these the board meetings and go speak to the officials at the Board of Education. Find out why are these decisions being made? What exactly is it that's going on in Wicomico County that is not going on anywhere else that needs to be addressed in that way? One of the other things I wanted to talk to you about, Michele, is as a professional, you can help us to really maybe understand the impact of labeling. I remember when one of my sons was younger, like around 6 years old, and a school administrator wanted to label him as having ADHD. Um, and I took him to a professional, and they were like, no, he doesn't have ADHD. He's a 6 year old. He's just really hyped up and he's excited. So that's what 6 year olds do. And from that point on, from that personal experience, I started really paying more attention to the labels and the stereotypes that are being placed on some of our children, especially our Black and Brown children, children coming from marginalized groups. You know, what do you see as a professional in the field of psychology that these labels, how do they impact our young people?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So there's actually a lot of research on the impact of labeling of people in general, but also children and what impact that has on them. And I think that that's one of the concerning things with the use of emergency petitions is if there are children who do not have psychological disorders or or they're not actually experiencing a mental health crisis, yet the response is equivalent to such, then I think we do run the risk of having children. Um, children are smart, right? So they can easily kind of figure out that people think that there's a problem with them, and then come to internalize that, and that could lead to later problems. Labels work the other way too, so when we label kids as gifted or as having potential, right, then that sets them up for success. So we internalize the expectations and the labels that other people give us. And partly why they manifest is also through a concept in my discipline known as the self-fulfilling prophecy, which is that there's an interaction that occurs between a person who's being labeled and others in their environment. And speaking of schools, this was actually, I'm going to kind of nerd out on you for a little bit, but this was nicely demonstrated in a study by Rosenthal and Jacobson in the 60s. Where they went into an elementary school classroom and they randomly selected a handful of kids and told the teachers that they had done extensive psychological testing and had identified these kids as being what they called intellectual bloomers, and told the teachers that these children were, really bright and that they would just really do well academically throughout the course of the year. And, the teachers believed that. And in actuality, these were just kids that they selected at random. They didn't do any psychological testing, but they followed the kids throughout the course of the school year. And by the end of the year, those kids that they had pre-identified, sure enough, were doing the best in the class, right? And the reason why is because the teachers were anticipating that these kids would have intellectual growth, right? They treated them different in the classroom. So, if you expect a kid to be gifted, think about the types of responses teachers have. They challenge them more. They call on them more. They give them more opportunities to adjust, and correct. They give them more feedback. They give them more attention, and kids respond to that, and kids learn from that, right? So the growth that they were witnessing was actually growth that the teachers manifested. So when I talk about that study in class, I always ask my students, they told the teachers that the kids were gifted or would be intellectual bloomers. What if the teachers had been told that these kids were going to be problems, or that they were struggling to learn, right? Or that they had a history of mental health problems or behavioral problems? Well, it's very clear, that the answer is the reverse would happen, right? We would, go into a certain situation looking for behaviors, maybe interpreting things that are innocuous or benign as being evidence of behavioral problems. We might act in ways that are excessively disciplinarian or stifling of creativity. And kids respond to those environments, and then they live up to the expectations that you set. So that's kind of my little nerd out on the labeling. But these are things that I think are quite concerning. And I think that they do help explain the disparate, you mentioned racial disparities. We do have racial disparities in the country, on a national level on graduation rates, grades, college admittance. And I think that quite a bit of this is probably explained by the expectations that people have for children that vary as a function of their race.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I work, and advocate a lot with regard to mass incarceration and the prison population. And one of the things that I've been told over and over again by some of the young men that I've spoken with is that they didn't expect me to do anything but end up in here. And that's one reason why I'm in here, because I followed the pattern of the men that went before me, whether it was my father, grandfather, uncles, whoever. I saw what they did. People kept telling me, you're going to be just like so-and-so. And so I just started doing what they were doing from a young age. And it's like you say, this is why I said we have got to change the narrative, change the way that we speak to these children. I remember when I was working in the public school system, and I was standing outside several times. This happened, waiting for the children as they were getting off the bus to come into the school. It was a elementary school, and as certain children would step down off the bus, heading to the school, one of the teachers would say, "Here comes so and so. He's gonna be in trouble before the day's over." Or I'm going to have to send him out of the room before the day's over, or he's going to be a problem. I can tell from just looking at him. So I'm thinking, wow, like seriously. So if you're saying that out loud, I'm sure that you've said it to him. And so when he walks in the door, he's anticipating that he's going to have a bad day, that he's going to end up in the office before the day is over. Why? Because an adult said that to him. And so this is why I would go out of my way to say, don't you look nice today? It is so good to have you here at school. I want you to have a good day. I want to hear good things about you at the end of the day. And a lot of the kids would seek me out at the end of the day to tell me, Miss Green, I had a good day. Miss Green, I got a star. Miss Green, I got a gift out of the gift box. They were so excited. And so it is important, as you say, that we understand the words that we speak and how they impact how these children behave. Now, there's another thing I wanted to mention, have a conversation with you about, is this term at risk. That is one of those terms that has irritated me most of my life. And the older I get, the more it irritates me, because again, it's a label. And it's like putting somebody in a box and saying that maybe because you come from a certain neighborhood, or because you're from a certain family of people, you're at risk. What exactly does at risk even mean? From a psychological standpoint, what would you say when you hear that? What do you think? How do you respond?
You're asking me all the hot button questions, I have answers to. I do want to just back up for a minute, because your previous example, I just want to point out that you don't have to say anything to kids in order to have them pick up the label, right? So even if the kids had come off the bus and the teacher hadn't said anything about, I can tell that one's a troublemaker, they just have to treat them like a troublemaker, right? And that's going to be enough to then manifest that behavior. Kids live up to the expectations, and they're savvy. They can discern when they're being treated differently than other children, and when they're being singled out, or when adults have bad negative perceptions of them and poor expectations. So it's not just what we say, but it's how we act and what we do. But you asked me about at risk, right? So yes, so I think that this word comes from a very well-meaning place, right? Where we recognize that there are disparities in outcomes for children who are from different neighborhoods or different socioeconomic status, or have particular family arrangements or trauma experiences. And we want to prevent things from becoming problematic when they get older, and so we call them at risk. But I think the problem with the use of the term at risk and the focus on risk is we ignore strengths, right? So even children who are lower income, or children who come from trauma backgrounds, or have experienced a lot of discord in their family or their community, those children still have strengths and assets. And when we just put ourselves in an at-risk mindset, I think we talked previously privately about how it's a deficit frame, right? It kind of leans into this assumption that you're starting from a place of a deficit, and you have to, somehow prevent the deficit from getting worse or help the deficit improve. And one of the things about my subfield of community psychology is we like to focus on strengths. So, all communities bring strengths. All of them have assets, and they may have less assets than other communities or other individuals, but that doesn't mean that the assets are absent. And so part of the role in my view of a community psychologist would be to find those assets and strengthen them, right? And that's a different approach, I think, than what we tend to take as a society of when we focus on risks, right? Then we focus on risk reduction or risk mitigation. Well, that's useful, but we also want to not overlook the fact that communities and people have assets. And another way that we can improve outcomes for children is to identify and strengthen assets.
I love that. I love that response. That was very good. Because we cannot deny the fact that there are communities, there are family circumstances that would put a child at risk for certain things. We're not saying pretend it doesn't exist. But what you just said is, even as we acknowledge that that child may be at risk for certain things to happen to them, then there also have certain strengths that could help prevent that thing from happening to them. And so we have a responsibility as parents and grandparents and teachers and mentors and teachers and, all community workers, these, people with the community activists. We all have a responsibility to look at these children and look for the strength, look for the areas that we can build them up in, and we can encourage them and push them to be the very best version of themselves, because every single one of them has something in them that is wonderful, that is bright, that is loving, that can be an asset to the community. And we have a responsibility to them to point these things out to them and then guide them to magnify those things versus the negative things. I love that. I love that. So tell me a little bit about, we're going to be coming to the close of our conversation shortly. What are you doing in the community right now, that something that we could help you with? How can we support what you're doing as a community? What can we do to help you in your particular work right now?
Well, I don't know if I have an answer for that, but I have something that I can suggest. And I would love to see people go to the Board of Ed meetings and start speaking up, because I don't know, and I'm guilty of this too, right? So I work and I have family responsibilities, and I don't get to go to the Board of Ed meetings, but I am aware of the people who do, and some of the messaging and the public comments I'm a little concerned about, because I think that when we're talking about, supporting kids, one of the ways that we need to support kids is ensuring that they have access to equitable education and inclusive education. So, we do have some current attempts to limit books, and I'm a little personally concerned about that. And so I do think, just staying more engaged and paying attention to what's going on in those Board of Ed meetings and attending and speaking up or emailing. I tend to email because I just, don't have a lot of the time, can't go to the Board of Ed. I think is really critical because I worry that the voice of parents and the voice of parents of Black kids and children with disabilities are not always present when those procedural decisions at the school level are being made. And that's from a variety of systemic barriers to access and ability to engage. But strategizing a way around that, I think, is really important, because otherwise we have our narrative gets lost, right? And it gets dominated by people who don't know our kids, and don't know what they need. So, and back to the assets, the curriculum can be an asset. The curriculum can be an asset. Personally, I'm very excited about the thought of, Black history being taught in African-American AP courses, and what a way to help empower youth and to engage them and develop a sense of cultural pride. I mean, that's an asset, right? That's what we want in schools. And so advocating for those types of school curriculum and school supports that can really foster pride in youth, I think is a good ask of our community.
Absolutely. It is important that we encourage them to have pride for who they are, for where they come from, their heritage, who they are, and how they express themselves. I think that we should never make a child feel bad about being who they are. And one of the ways that we support that is, like you say, by being involved, because they know if we're involved or not. They know if we're just home complaining to them and to other people in the house about what we don't like. But they also know if we're not attending meetings, if we're not speaking to those in charge who make these decisions. And so we have got to, like you say, attend these meetings. And I'm like you, I don't even have any children in school right now, but I'm just concerned as a mother, period, about some of the things I'm seeing about, as you mentioned, about wanting to take away some of the reading material because it doesn't align with someone's personal beliefs or someone's religious beliefs. No, we don't want that. Thank you very much.
But and these are systems that are designed to not have participation. So, I don't want anyone to feel like, bad that they are not attending more regularly, because these are systems that are not designed for people to participate, frankly. If it was easy to participate, then people would. But
absolutely.
But finding a way to keep an eye on what's going on and just educating yourself and speaking out when appropriate, I think is just really critical.
And I think, as we're winding down, I do want to say, I think that the email, emailing, as you mentioned, is extremely effective, because I have a situation like, as I said, everybody knows I advocate for inmates and so forth and so on. And I kept emailing a particular person who's in charge of the Department of Corrections for months and getting no response, because they're probably just like, oh, this is just a nut lady. But I just kept emailing. And now I literally, if I email in the morning with a concern, by the next morning, I have a response. And so that comes from consistency and being clear about what it is that I'm expecting. And so we have to do the same thing with our educational systems. And our children are depending on us to speak up for them, because they can't speak for themselves. Many of them don't know how to use their voice. So we have to do that. Are there any closing remarks or comments that you'd like to share with us before you leave, Professor?
Well, I just want to thank you for letting me come and talk to you for a little bit. And I hope that this has been helpful and useful. And, I think as we move forward, just I think asking those critical questions again of our Board of Education and our administrators, and identifying, why is there an increased reliance on emergency petitions? What, is happening? Because I do reject the explanation that there's increased mental health, issues just in this county. That just doesn't, that might be an easy explanation, but it doesn't it doesn't pass the sniff test. So, and it may just be a lack of structural supports or funding or staff in the schools. And those are the questions that we want to really find answers to, so that we can, provide input on what types of supports are needed in schools to ensure kids have good outcomes. And kids are going to be in our community when they grow up, and we can either give them positive experiences that help them be productive members of our society, or we can shame them and discipline them to the extent to which they are not productive. So I think this is an important implications for our community at large.
Absolutely. Wow, that was powerful. I love this conversation. I learned a lot, and I'm sure those who are listening now have learned some things, and those who will be listening in the replay that we did not think about before. You have stimulated us to think, and that's what a good teacher does. Thank you very much. Again, I'd like to thank Professor, okay, let me say this correctly, Professor Schlehofer, for joining me tonight. It means a lot for me to take time out of your busy schedule to sit with me. Who said that was close enough? Oh my goodness. I hate that when I mess up people's names. But I just really appreciate you taking time to talk. And we will talk again very soon. I know, but I have one of those names that people are always messing up, and I've always been like, oh my God. But anyway, from my heart that I really, really appreciate you, and you are my friend, and thank you so much.
Well, thank you.
All right, we'll talk again soon.
All righty, bye-bye.
All right, bye-bye.
I can't get a piece of paper.